if you want, of climate neutrality, zero pollution, biodiversity, energy efficiency. And with the same euro, you reach as much as you can. Climate adaptation, of course. So this is a little bit what we're doing also to secure that private investors invest their money where it makes most sense for them, for the economy, and for society. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very comprehensive overview of what's there from the EU financing perspective. Maybe Mr. Heinrich Rolfs, you want to continue?
Yes, thank you for the questions, and I'll try to come back to some of your questions and to the remarks from the other speakers. And I think I can directly follow up on the issue of taxonomy, which for me a very important instrument to guide investors in a specific direction. This taxonomy should, and I think it's on a good way, with some discussion points still around, but it's on a good, really set up criteria of what exactly is the necessary and clean investment of the future. In this context, definitely having such criteria for private investment, knowing this is reasonable, this will be supported by the policy objectives, it goes in a clean, renewable, sustainable direction. This is certainly what the taxation can and should provide. I'm a little bit concerned about what I hear in recent days, that obviously there are quite some efforts to include fossil gas or even nuclear in the definition of green investment, of green taxonomy. I think this definitely should happen because it would really give disincentives for the really green investment, and it would really deviate investment in the wrong direction, and actually in cases of nuclear, even extremely expensive and long-term lock-in. But this is the point of investment and green investment. I think in general, it's quite important for governments, of course, based on the EU strategies like the Green Deal and the related frameworks of target setting for greenhouse gas reduction, for efficiency, for renewables, etc. It's quite important for governments to set up clear policy frameworks, well, set up or maintain or tweak to improve clear policy frameworks, which definitely need targets, ambitious targets, as, for example, shown in the national climate and energy plans, which all countries of the European Union have set up. But I think these targets need to be clear. They need milestones which can clearly be followed, which are monitored, and where we see whether or not objectives are achieved. In this context, it's very, very important, certainly, to provide these trajectories, to allow for private investors to know what kind of investment, which investment they can afford. This is about access to capital and capital costs. This is very important. And maybe one final point for this intervention now. I think it's quite interesting to draw some conclusions from what we experienced through these various programs trying to support private households, but also industries during the pandemic. Among the things we saw all over Europe, and to my knowledge in most parts of the world, renewable energy investment has proven to be much, much more resilient than other economic investments. So it showed that people have confidence in renewable energy, investors have confidence in renewable energy, because they see that this is a way forward for a livable planet and an economy which actually creates jobs which will be there in a few decades as well, and which will not have to be phased out like the jobs now in coal and other fossil industry. So actively organizing the transformation by setting up targets, enabling policies, and of course access to finance. I think this is where we want to go and where we can go, and I'm optimistic we do.
Yeah, thank you very much for your key messages. And maybe Mr. Kender, you also want to touch upon some of the points from your private sector perspective, and then I think we'll wrap up because we are running out of time for this session. Thank you.
What we do as a telco operator, that actually the pandemic quite intensively impacted the telecom sector overall. Not only the businesses that are our clients and that needed to stop their operations, but that as well as tourists and impact of the tourism. Much less people visited Croatia, therefore doing the roaming in our network. Much less Croats went to abroad. So that's the impact which we see in the business. What we additionally see in our data is that compared to the last year or the year before, we have seen that CO2 emissions reduced 12%. Of course, less car fleet and less heating of our premises because of people working from home contributed to this. But despite we see the increase in energy consumptions. Therefore, our main goal was to go to more high energy efficient trade-offs, and therefore our goal was due to the higher consumption of internet and higher consumption of the electricity in our networks to be more energy efficient. Before COVID-19 pandemic, we had opportunity to work flexible as well. That means during the pandemic, almost all of our employees did not work to work every day. Therefore, transport is one of the biggest pollutants in the cities around the world. We have witnessed that climate in the cities change a lot. In example, only in Zagreb, we know that in the last 20 years, climate raised up to 1.5% Celsius in city center, as well as to the Mediterranean and continental climate. Therefore, our main story is we need to go for not only the solutions for us, but as well for our clients in the area of the smart cities. We are using and managing operations smarter and more sustainable, and as a digital leader, we have opportunity and obligation to do it.
Okay, thanks very much to all of you for this interesting panel, and we will continue our discussion by focus on digital transformation in the next session. But before that, we will take a 10-minute break. But thank you very much to all of you for your interesting points and interventions. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Welcome back to the Economist event on the EU Recovery Fund and opportunities for Croatia. In this panel, we will discuss the significance of digital transformation beyond the coronavirus pandemic, Croatia digital government infrastructure, and also the status of the government legislation on the issue. We know that Croatia has made above average progress in digitalizing its economy over the past 5 years, but it remains below the EU average. According to the Digital Economy and Society Index, DAISY, for 2020, which is an index compiled since 2014 by the European Commission to monitor digital progress in EU member states, Croatia remained in 20th place out of 28 countries in 2020. The EU Recovery and Resilience Fund is an opportunity to speed up the digitalization of the country, and especially given that national recovery plans should devote at least 20% of total expenditure to investments and reforms to support the digital transition. I have the pleasure to have a panel of experts to discuss this with us today, and I will introduce you to our guests for this session. Is Mr. Zoran Stančić, Class Advisor of the Director General for Communication, Networks and Content and Technology of the European Commission, that I'm sure will elaborate more on some of the points I've just mentioned. And then we will have Ciri Dvorančanski, Member of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of A1 FASCA, and Gianluca Antonini, Executive Partner, Cognitive and Analytics at IBM Global Business Services. Thank you all for being with us today. Without further ado, I will leave the floor to Mr. Stančić from the European Commission, so that you can elaborate more on the issue. Thank you for being with us today. I think we might have some connection issues.
Today, I hope that the connection works. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, it's slightly better. I will ask my colleagues to look into that from the technical perspective, and also ask if you could please mute yourself. Okay? Yes, now it's better. Thank you. Let's try. It was working. Mr. Stančić, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes, it's okay. I think you can start your presentation if you wish. Let's try.
Yes, I can hear you, but it seems that there are cuts. So
yes, there are, but I can hear you quite well. Let's try. Okay, I think we are having some connection issues with Mr. Stančić, so maybe we can move on to our next speaker, Mr. Ciri Dvorančanski. Thank you. Maybe you may want to start.
My name is Ciri Dvorančanski. I hope you can hear me. Is it okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. So good afternoon once more, and sorry to see that our panelists, they have problem with the connectivity. I hope that we will show that our network works well in A1 Croatia. I would like to cover three views on this topic of the EU digital gap panel. First, I would like to point out importance of the digital transformation in Croatia, but also in the region. It was obvious that in the year 2020, when pandemic hit entire region and entire world, that there was big difference between the companies who actually successfully started digital transformation prior to pandemics, and actually all these companies who started earlier, they were showing clear outperformance versus the rest of the pack. And actually, we see recently that many companies which were laggards in the digital transformation, they are now more seriously considering acceleration of these transformation programs. We don't see it only in the private sector, but also in the public sector and the government interest to accelerate the transformation of the entire ecosystem, because of course the digital transformation is depending on the entire ecosystem. It's not independently possible only in the one company, because we are depending on the digital banking, digital payment solution, digital distribution. So if the ecosystem is not adapted, actually there will be very slow development of the transformation on the society. In the year 2020, we saw that the companies and the public sector were forced to immediately transition to the new operating models, go e-schooling, e-health, using the digital signature platforms, self-care applications of the companies to actually address the issue which we were facing last year. What we can say that A1 Croatia started digital transformation in the year 2016, and actually many of the initiatives we started had great, let's say, impact on our readiness to compete in this very difficult period of the pandemic. As an examples, I would say we dramatically invested into development of the skills in the company. We brought new experts and expertise, not only internally, but also with the external partners to accelerate our transformation program. We invested in the new technologies, artificial intelligence, robotization, automatic scheduler, and other automation solutions to assure that we can provide the services in digital way. We developed the A1 application, which allows customers access our services 24 hours every day, and actually not only get service, but also to purchase new services. And we also developed the first virtual digital shop in Croatia, which actually was extremely successful during this pandemic. What we can say that thanks to these initiatives, our company was not experiencing any major operational issues during this situation, and we are considering that these activities which we started to perform from 2016, were not only important to set up our, let's say, operation for the digital revolution which is coming, but also is bringing a great competitiveness in the field of future development of the new services which we can develop for the customers. When I move to the second point of my view regarding this transformation program and digitalization of the economy, you rightly said that Croatia is not standing very well in the DESI index. We are actually standing long years behind. Here I see that there is definitely positive development in the last 2 years, and I will comment it later on in my speech. But when we talk about the digital transformation, I think everybody is now aware that there would be no digital transformation, and also our society would not be able to perform activities during the pandemics if we would not have strong and well-developed infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure in Croatia. And actually, we've seen during the last year that all operators, entire sector was capable to secure increased capacity demand, which was growing more than 80% in the last year, and in that way contribute to this, I would say, relatively smooth performance of the economy in this difficult situation. As I mentioned, we expect that because of that, government, but also public and private sector recognize that modernization of the infrastructure, investment into the next generation networks, 5G, fiber rollout, but also ICT solutions like security are fundamental and the basement for actually digital transformation of economy. That's why we strongly believe that incentives from EU in the form of the EU funds for the development of the infrastructure, but also design of the 5G auction and the entire ecosystem to support accelerating investment in Croatia are fundamental for the digital transformation in the country. What we see that all the technologies which we are discussing internally, but also with our B2B and the public sector partners, are very much depending on the quality of the networks and their readiness to support the new solutions. We see great development in the e-commerce, digital signature in Croatia. We see also that some solutions allowing the green transformation of the industries would not be actually possible without this infrastructure development, which is actually coming now to the next phase with the completely new technologies like 5G and then the fiber acceleration in rollout in the Croatia. So that would be definitely another, I would say, fundamental pillar of the digital, let's say, readiness and the competitiveness of the Croatia. How we see the development of the legislation, we see, as I already mentioned, quite strong and positive development from the side of the government in the recent 2 years. Government already clearly stated that they consider the development of the broadband infrastructure, and we're talking about mobile and the fixed, as the fundament of the digital agenda of the country. And we've seen already a few very good examples that this is not just on the paper, but it was executed. First example is EU funds for the development of the fiber infrastructure in the rural areas, where A1 Croatia won the tenders for the coverage of the 50,000 households by the year 2023, and by this helping to increase the competitiveness of the rural areas, but also quality of life in these regions. Second, and promising examples, and we are still waiting for the results, is the design of the 5G auction, where government clearly stated that they would like to incentivize the investment design, pro-investment design of the auction, which would actually stimulate faster rollout of the 5G, and by this actually addressing also this, I would say, unpleasant position on the DESI index, as we discussed at the beginning, where we still see some, I would say, gaps and concerns, and we would like to see some acceleration in development, is definitely construction law, where we see still some discrepancy between the legislation on the level of the government and the local governments' spatial plans limitations, which are imposed in some of the regions. We believe that this discrepancy and the lack of alignment should be resolved very soon. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to roll out 5G technologies and assure that broadband infrastructure will be ready for the development and improvement in the DESI index in Croatia. And the second point is related to acceleration of the national program for the broadband infrastructure, which is actually supporting program to accelerate the coverage of the rural areas and assuring that actually we can provide the services not only in the cities but also in the more distant locations, and by this increase the competitiveness of these regions and also the quality of life. Here we were already seeing that EU funds for these programs were approved, but the construction and let's say the rollout of the program is still, I would say, not fast enough, and actually could create some bottlenecks in the future regarding this connectivity and quality of internet programs which are running in Croatia. To summarize, we see that there is definitely positive development in the development in the digital transformation in Croatia. We see very good examples in the stipulation of the investments in the development of the broadband infrastructure, and we are also positive that thanks to the COVID, there is more and more momentum in the digital transformation, not only in the private sector but also in the public sector. And with that, I believe that we have a great starting point to accelerate the development of the digital transformation of the society in Croatia in the coming years. And I'm staying positive that we, as the company, as A1, with our investment strategy and innovative solutions, could contribute to this process in Croatia.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dvorjančanski, for this comprehensive and interesting overview of the status of digitalization in Croatia. I am conscious that you might be leaving us before the end of the session. So just in case, I think you covered quite a lot of issues and both positives and also challenges ahead, which is good. And
thank you.
I'm
thank
looking
you
forward to.
Sorry, I will need to apologize.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And I think we're still having some problems with to connect with Mr. Stančić, but maybe we can continue for now the discussion with Mr. Gianluca Antonini of IBM Global Business Services. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Antonini.
Hi, Agnese. Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me properly.
Yes, all good. Thanks.
Yeah, very good. Okay, yes. So let me start with a sort of a broader reflection. I think the last 2 decades, unfortunately, have seen, gave us a few examples of rare events, right? And starting back from 9/11 up to the financial crisis, roughly 10 years ago, and what happened in North African countries after 2010, and now COVID-19 pandemic breakout, which is just the last on the list from a chronological point of view, but as all my colleagues already highlighted, the impact is truly huge, it's truly global, is on everyone's life and every business daily routines. But I think it serves for us as a wake-up call that at the end, unfortunately, the unexpected and the unlikely are really more tangible and plausible than anyone could previously anticipate, right? I think we are seeing accelerations everywhere or willing to accelerate in more or less any direction. But I think both business and political leaders will agree with me that some, and probably most of the changes that are induced by the pandemic situation now in domains like strategy, management, operations, public policy, budgetary priorities are probably here to stay in a way or in another for a longer time, even after COVID. From an IBM perspective, and going closer to now technology, what we do see is this, it's a pretty broad topic, right? It's a generalized acceleration towards digital transformation, adoption of digital technologies, adoption of cloud technologies in different phases. I think there were plenty of organizations that started already. These topics were more or less on top of the agendas of many players. But probably COVID just, provided even more accelerating factor, and in some cases reshuffled those agenda priorities. This digital transformation, at the end of the day, it's enabled by what we call exponential technologies and increasing adoption of those, right? Like artificial intelligence, automation, blockchain, Internet of Things, across the different sectors. And there is a growing interest. It was there before as well, but probably the current situation accelerates even more in the innovation process itself. So how innovation is created, how public and private players can stay on top of startup accelerator programs, coming up with programs for implementing innovation hubs. There are many organizations are not always at ease keeping the pace with the speed of innovation in the way it happens across different fields. So they need some help into understanding what is truly relevant depending on the context and how to integrate recent advances in technology within the, I would say, daily reality, right? I would even say that this sort of air of global uncertainty, it's putting at least a convergence, a unique, strong accent on the need to capture efficiency gains across the spectrum. So everyone understands today that whatever he's doing, he probably can do better, faster, more accurately. And that's really the core trigger behind the digital transformation, at least one of the most important angles. We see growing demand across European countries in redesigning entire business processes, coming up with what we call intelligent workflows, new ways of doing business that are powered at the end by automation technologies, for example, artificial intelligence and the like. We went through several programs, both in the private and public sector, working with insurance companies, with banks, large industrial players, where at the end, the final goal is not only to have sort of digital interfaces at the beginning and at the end of a business process, so having, for example, chats to immediately in real time talk to clients, or maybe have digital e-documents to speed up onboarding of clients. But it's also, that's the next step of digital transformation, is going into the core of the backbone process and plugging additional intelligence and new technologies to speed it up, essentially helping subject matter experts in their field, how to set up a new type of partnership between the human and the technology. So combine what we call hybrid AI systems, where you have the best of new AI technologies with the need to have human subject matter experts still in the loop. So that's the next step. So there are plenty of examples also in the public space with the need to improve efficiency first of all, breaking the legacy, the technology legacy, modernizing the infrastructure. As my colleague was making the example for the 5G in the telco sector, that's true across verticals. Digitizing, for example, making smarter the taxation system. For example, if we want to assure companies that want to invest in a region to get fast access to all the needed information to do that. I think another field where it's a no-brainer, we all have kids, or we have friends who have kids. So we are seeing these days, it's crazy actually, entire generations of students taking classes from home. And even we probably do not understand yet, what is going to be the mid to long-term impact of this situation. But what we truly understand is the importance of having up-to-date, state-of-the-art technology platforms to help them facing this challenge. So having platforms that can, for example, filter content by relevance, that can help teachers to correct student tests in an unbiased way, having modern communication platform underlying the educational platform itself. So that's very, very important. I think all in all, I would say, as was pointed out also by other speakers, that all the subtopics that are part of the digital transformation broader topic, they were already there. No surprise. But today, the pandemic situation just put a strong acceleration factor. It's challenging because it's a systemic shock, which is going across all different fields. So entities, both public and private, have to face the challenge, the accelerating challenge across a number of dimensions, which is not simple. So priorities got shifted. But I think that the bottom line of the pandemic situation is that essentially there is a constant need today to be able to work in continuously changing situations. So there is not almost anymore a stable environment. We need to gain those skills that gives us agility and the ability to adapt to constantly new and unseen situations. So at the end, this is going to be really new crucial driver for all players to gain sustainable competitive advantage. We all hope that finally the situation will soon get to a sort of a normality, and hopefully it's not too different from the normality that we were used to before pandemic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antonini, for this very interesting presentation of yours. And I believe that we were able to establish a phone connection with Mr. Zoran Stančić of the European Commission, DG for Communication Networks and Technology. Can you hear us?
Yes, clear, loud and clear, and I'm sorry for this problem with the connection.
Yeah, no worries, and thank you for being with us today.
Once again, it's my pleasure to participate in this very important panel. I think it's very timely to organize it right now because it's only about 1 month before the member states have to submit their recovery and resilience plans to the member states. I have prepared some slides, so I'll just go very fast through them. If you can put the first slide, please. On the first slide, you will see very clearly that what are the general objectives of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Promote social, economic, territorial cohesion, strengthen economic and social resilience, mitigate the crisis which we have, and at the same time, very importantly, support green and digital transition. If we go to the next slide, please, focus on the digital. As it has been said already by previous panelists, we have very high level of ambition regarding the digital transformation in all member states. It is clearly stated by the legislator that at least 20% of the expenditure has to be devoted for supporting digital transition. And this has been endorsed by the Council and the Parliament. And at the same time, with the Commission, we have developed a specific methodology to take the expenditure for the digital. What are we looking at? So we look at the investments in connectivity, in digital-related investments in R&D, in supporting human capital, also in issues like e-government, digital public services, local digital ecosystems, supporting digitalization for businesses, and also investment in digital capacity and deployment of advanced technologies, as well as greening the digital sector. Some of these issues have already been spelled out by the previous panelists as well, for which I'm very grateful. So where is the starting point of Croatia? If you go to the next slide, we see that Croatia in DESI index, Digital Economy and Society Index, is somewhere at the lower third of the EU member states. But at the same time, as you know very well on DESI, we look at actually 5 different segments: in connectivity, in human capital, in the use of internet services, then in the integration of digital technologies, and last but not least, digital public services. So where does Croatia stand in specific parts here? In some of the parts, Croatia is performing better than average of the EU, and in some parts, some of these 5 segments which I mentioned earlier, Croatia is underperforming. So let's look just very briefly in the areas where Croatia is performing really well. Croatia is doing an excellent job respecting the integration of digital technologies. Very clearly, some of the larger companies of Croatia are doing very good job regarding uptaking specific digital services, like, for example, using big data analytics or cloud services. And in some part, and the major challenge, not only for Croatia, but this is important for all EU member states, is supporting digital transition for SMEs. If you go to the next slide, please, digitalization of businesses in Croatia, you see very clearly that for example, some digital innovation hubs are being used quite extensively. However, for example, digital innovation, business models, production processes, marketing, product development and services, it still remains a challenge. Where Croatia is doing very good job as well. If you go to the next slide, digital skills in Croatia. Here we have, I would say, general figure quite good, so it's a bit better, so it's just around the average. However, Croatia is, for example, on some parts, for example, ICT graduates doing excellent job, so better than average in the EU. However, in some other parts, if you look at the figures which were stated by the ICT sector, 62% of the Croatian enterprises are unable to fill vacancies in 2019, and I think the same figure in 2000 or similar figure in 2020. So what does it mean? It seems that there is considerable brain drain going on in Croatia, and I think that is one of the challenges of Croatia as well. If you go to the next slide, please. I think that, the starting point is that Croatia is in some parts doing a good job. However, now the main challenge for Croatia is how to develop a very strategic approach and use these substantial funds, which have been very clearly recognized by the Prime Minister. Just as a reminder, on a top of 8 billion of euros devoted to the cohesion, on a top of 4.2 billion euros for agriculture, common agriculture policy of Croatia, we have 6 billion euros in grants for Croatia and up to 3.6 billion euros for loans in Croatia. And then, in addition to that, there is about €500 million going for recovery assistance and cohesion in territories of Europe, and additional 169 million euros for just transition funds. So there are huge amounts of money coming to Croatia. What we would like to see as European Commission is that there is a strategic framework which would link these huge amounts of money, link it with the reform program of Croatia, which would be in line with country-specific recommendations, and at the same time address the challenges which Croatia is facing in the long term. What we think is important now that would happen, Prime Minister said very clearly that there will be a public consultation. Unfortunately, it seems that there will be very little time for really profound public consultation because the member states have to submit their plans until the 30th of April to the Commission. Commission will then have 2 months to analyze the programs, and then our opinion and our views and all the programs will be put to the table of the Council for the approval. Where do we see specific opportunities? I read earlier on some of the statements from, for example, from the Employers Association of Croatia, also from the Association of Entrepreneurs. I think it's very important that we don't look at this RRF as an easy money, but also look at the loans which are available. As I said, a significant amount for Croatia, up to nearly 4 billion euros. So I think with help of the private sector, a real substantial change could happen, not by helping Croatia to get to the business as before the pandemics, but to the next level, to the higher level. And actually, I very much subscribe to what has been stated by, for example, colleagues from the OECD, to address one of the main challenges of Croatia will remain to increase the productivity in the country. And what I mean by that, of course, not by working more, but by improving the added value per capita in Croatia. And that could be done, I will allow myself to say, only by the digital transformation. Of course, Commission is working very closely now with the Croatian national authorities. We have received first draft already just before Christmas. Now, I think about 10 days ago, we have received the next draft, altogether about 700 pages of text, which is very profoundly elaborated. But as I said, the devil is in the detail. So now it's important that we use these last 5 weeks in order to make the best possible program, which will allow Croatia to address the challenges which are in front of them. Thank you very much. That's my presentation. And one very important thing, which is in my last slide, is this multi-country digital projects. It's very important whenever we look at the digital transformation. Of course, the member states have to focus on their own situation, but not forget the European dimension. And this is the multi-country digital projects. For example, how to use the Euro quantum communication infrastructure, where Croatia has spelled out its interest. Also, for example, connected public administration, so connected all over Europe, public administration and the digital innovation hubs. So whenever we look at specific member states, the member states always have to have at the back of their heads also this pan-European dimension on how to use these multi-country digital projects, which are very much promoted by the European Commission, in order to address for example, digital single market on European scale in the right way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation, Mr. Stancic, and for being with us today. I'm conscious of time, but maybe allow me to ask you just probably one question each, and then we'll wrap up and move to the next panel. Well, essentially, if you could just pick some of the points you mentioned, and I would ask Mr. Antonini to give us like your ideas about where digitalization is going. So if Croatia wants to be competitive in the future on digitalization, where do you see the key three areas towards which the country should move on or invest more on? And to Mr. Stancic, from your perspective, I think we saw some of the gaps and issues Croatia should work on, and some of the things that have already improved quite substantially over the last year. But if you had to pick up some of the areas that you think are particularly crucial in terms of the digital development for the country, and if you wanted to list the three main ones very briefly, that's for you. That would be my question for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So for me, I think the first issue which I would advocate for is put all this funding in a strategic framework. Link it, for example, with the strategy eCroatia 2030, which is still under development, but I think very good background for putting the investment in strategic framework. Second thing, very important, is skills and e-businesses. So very important to develop specific actions in the domain of skills, which would support e-businesses. Third domain, digitalization of the industry, and especially SMEs and micro-enterprises. I think that's a huge opportunity. And last but not least, I will hold myself a fourth one. We should not forget about the investment in connectivity. Very important. There is a gap towards the gigabit society. Looking at the 5G, there is still no indication about when the auction for spectrum for 5G will be developed. But at the same time, we have to look at investments in 5G and also at 5G corridors. So I would very much advocate that also these elements, in very close cooperation with the industry, have to be elaborated.
Thanks very much, Mr. Antonini. Mr. Stancic, if you want to elaborate as well, thanks.
I think we just swapped the order. Yeah. Okay. So from my perspective, I think going through the DAISY report for Croatia. So I think the no-brainer is the infrastructure part, and the 5G has been already highlighted by the first speaker in this panel. And yes, the frequency allocations, that's step number one, and then the challenge that the pandemic shed light on is and completely unusual amounts of digital load on the infrastructure. So if whatever reason, or if some of these changes will remain over time for the long term, especially, for example, working from home, right, and with work being more decentralized, telco kind of infrastructure will really need to be remodernized. So that's point number one. The point number two that came to my mind, so which were a little bit the two of the 5 DAISY indicators where the country is underperforming compared to the EU average, is the digitalization in public services, and I think that's somehow sort of a foundational work has been done. It is my takeaway from those platforms like the e-fees and e-business. I think that's really the digital backbone that now needs to use the funds to move to the next step, because as I was saying before, efficiency is not only at the beginning or at the end where interfaces with users are into a process, but also in between the process, and how people, subject matter experts that are working on that process, can use new technologies to just be accelerated, right? So that's point number two. And I think point number three, even if in the DAISY score the human capital is pretty much in line with the EU average, I think there is an interesting segmentation if you look into the numbers, because the number of ICT graduates and even university level and even more, it's growing constantly, but maybe not enough to satisfy the private market. But that's a different story. I think there is another indicator which is a little bit posing a challenge. 18% or close to 20% of people are not using the internet. And I think here we might have a demographic component. So the way how I read this is that we obviously focus on younger generations, but they maybe don't need that much of focus in the sense that they are quite at ease with new technologies. But there is a large base of the pyramid of people, older than a certain age, they might not be at ease with using new technologies. And I think, so from an educational standpoint, we should focus more on those people to raise up the average level of digital skills, because at the end of the day, those people are also digital service potential consumers, and that will just, bring another push on the consumption of services. So we need to take care about the demand and not only on the supply side.
Thanks very much, Mr. Antonini. I'm sorry I swapped your names before. But thank you both for your last remarks and conclusion. I think you raised a lot of interesting points and food for thought for this session. And thank you again for being with us today and for joining the panel.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
We will have a 5-minute break now, and then we will move on to the next session.
Ne čekajte s uređenjem dječje sobe. Ugovorite gotovinski kredit u ZABI s fiksnom kamatnom stopom u samo par klikova putem.
Welcome back to this virtual Economist event, looking at the EU Recovery and Resilience Fund and Croatia's Growth and Recovery Outlook. My name's Joan Hoey. I'm the Director for Europe at the Economist Intelligence Unit. And our next panel is going to be looking in detail at the financial landscape in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a lot to discuss. We've got 6 speakers to help us focus on the important questions and issues. Before I introduce them, just to say to our audience, please do take the opportunity to submit questions via the streaming platform, which you can do as you listen to the speakers and as questions occur to you. So I encourage you all to do that. So let me turn now to introduce our panelists for this session. The first speaker is Boris Vucic, the governor of the Croatian National Bank. After that, we will have Elizabeth McCall, member of the Supervisory Board of the European Central Bank. Then Paul Hilbers, who is Executive Director at the IMF. Christoph Schöfberg, CEO of Erste Bank Croatia. Then Federico Barriga Salazar, Director Sovereigns, Emerging Europe at Fitch Ratings. And our final speaker, Hrvoje Dolenec, Chief Economist at Zagrebačka banka. So welcome all of you. Very much looking forward to hearing what you've all to say. So without further ado, let me hand over to the Governor of the Croatian National Bank to kick off the discussion. Governor. Okay, I think we've lost the connection with the governor. So I'm going to carry on so that we don't waste time, because we are going to be tight for time with 6 panelists, and I do want to devote time for discussion. So while the governor is trying to reconnect, let me turn to Elizabeth McCall from the ECB. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. I'm speaking with you from New York today, and it's really an honor to be with all of you. So at the height of the European sovereign debt crisis, the World Bank published a report on how Europe could regain its economic footing. The conclusions were remarkable. Rather than joining into the choir of those who demanded an altogether new growth model, the authors maintained that Europe should simply double down on what had made it so uniquely successful in the very first place. The authors pointed out that between 1950 and 1973, Western European incomes converged quickly toward those in the United States. And then until the early 1990s, the incomes of more than 100 million people in the poorer southern periphery, Greece, southern Italy, Portugal, Spain, grew closer to those in advanced Europe. And with the enlargement of 2004 and 2007, another 100 million people in Central and Eastern Europe were absorbed into the European Union, and again, their incomes increased quickly. The conclusion? Europe invented a convergence machine, and its most powerful mechanism is the acquis communautaire, the common set of rules which made Europe both intrepid and inclusive. To overcome Europe's economic woes, these rules needed to be updated and expanded and not abandoned. And these are the findings by experts working at a Bretton Woods institution and thus having the benefit of looking at Europe from a distance. As an American working at the ECB at a conference of a British newspaper on Croatia, I come to a similar assessment. Making use of Europe's rules and institutions for supervising banks in Croatia makes enormous sense. I've come to my role as the first American serving on the ECB's supervisory board with an enormous sense of respect and responsibility. And this sense is born from my personal experiences as a student in Europe and Germany, where I learned about and took to heart the importance of the European project and its incredible place in history, And it also emanates from my experiences both as a banker and as a supervisor in New York, where I faced many challenges. The experiences taught me well, taught me about the excellence of supervision, the need for excellence in supervision, and how important that is to economic well-being of our overall system. And sometimes this means making difficult decisions, even unpopular ones, for the longer term good. Certainly room for evolution toward excellence. Europe has made great strides when it comes to supervisory, very much to our collective longer term good. So our current situation bears this out. Stringent rules on capital, together with effective and consistent supervision, put banks in a much stronger position when the economic shock of the pandemic hit. And the swift and the unified supervisory response to the shock has contributed so far to avoiding excessive procyclicality. Such a response would simply have been unthinkable before the SSM. Not only did we manage to curb excessive procyclicality, fragmentation of financial conditions were contained as well. And so, in marked contrast to the great financial crisis, there's been no rise in the dispersion of comparable lending rates across the banking union. And by this measure, banking market integration hasn't taken a hit induced by the pandemic. With the establishment of close cooperation between the ECB and the Croatian National Bank, the HNB is in a position comparable to all NCAs of the member states participating in the SSM, and it joins in this unified and very, very critically important supervisory approach. And since the 1st of October last year, the ECB has been in charge of the direct supervision of the Croatian significant institutions and the common procedures for all supervised entities, as well as the oversight of the less significant institutions, which are continuing to be directly supervised by the HNB. My colleague Martina is a valued member of the supervisory board with the same voting rights and obligations as all the members. HNB representatives also participate in the SSM networks. The difference in the adoption of supervisory decisions in close cooperation is that ECB legal acts, including the supervisory decisions that are addressed to the banks, don't have a direct effect in member states outside the euro area. So the ECB does not address any supervisory decisions to the banks established in Croatia, but instead sends instructions, guidelines, requests, recommendations to the HNB, which in turn adopts the necessary national supervisory measures with respect to the banks. And the national law in Croatia requires the HNB to adopt the measures requested by the ECB in relation to the banks. So in times of heightened uncertainty, as during the pandemic we're all experiencing, especially now, close cooperation has the potential to instill additional confidence in the Croatian banking system. Bank balance sheets, thorough asset quality review, significant institutions have benefited from the temporary relief measure commonly adopted across Europe, as well as the flexibility provided by the ECB. And all of this has been geared toward ensuring that the directly supervised banks can continue to fulfill their critical role in funding the real economy as the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic become more apparent in the weeks and months ahead. And in the supervisory board, the HNB can provide input into the decisions on large European banks active in Croatia. I'm confident that by safeguarding the safety and soundness of banks, the close cooperation between the ECB and the HNB will promote overall financial and economic stability, as well as the efficient allocation of capital. Last but not least, close cooperation is a step towards the eventual adoption of the euro in Croatia. Europe's convergence machine is outfitted now with an additional feature, and this is very much a positive, especially during this pandemic, which threatens lives and our economic well-being. Cooperation has been enabled immeasurably by the SSM. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Elizabeth. I believe that we have the governor back, Governor Boris Vujicic, governor of the Croatian National Bank. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Good afternoon. Yes, I had a little bit of a problems, but I'm back and I can hear you very well. Hope you can hear me as well. As for the outlook of Croatia, and I'll come back to what Elizabeth has said, also our joining of the SSM and SRM and ERM. But first, let me try to lay out the way we see the economy and outlook for the economy ahead of us. Of course, we have seen a large drop in the GDP growth last year of 8.3%, which is actually less than we thought in spring or at the beginning of summer of last year, when we estimated that the economy will drop by 10 percentage points. Then the tourism season was better than expected. We improved our forecast to 8% drop, and we ended up a little bit worse due to the second and partial lockdown that we've seen at the end of last year and that we are still experiencing at this moment. Compared to the previous crisis, more than 10 years ago, great financial crisis, we see much, first we see a different impact of this crisis on the economy, in the sense that it has not impacted in the same way all sectors. Actually, there is a very large difference between the sectors that are subject to the epidemiological containment measures, social distancing and other measures, and the rest of the economy. So we've seen a very rapid already recovery of manufacturing and construction, and the continued problems in the services sector, which has been hit worst by the containment measures. As we look into the future, we see much more rapid overall recovery of the economy that we've seen during the last crisis. And at the moment, we estimate that the rate of growth of GDP in 21 might be 5%. Of course, this is subject to still very high uncertainty, mostly connected with the epidemiological situation and the speed of the vaccination. We have seen slower vaccination speed than we expected at the beginning of the year. And the overall outlook, of course, depends on the speed of the vaccination and the removal of the containment measures, opening up of the borders, particularly as we move towards the tourism season, which is always an important in Croatia. As for the external sector, we have seen even in 2020 with a large drop in GDP, surplus in the current and capital account because of the inflow primarily of the EU funds. We've seen a small current account deficit after many years of a surplus, but that has been more than compensated by the capital inflows. And looking forward in next years, we again see increase in the current and capital account surplus. We see both the current account surplus coming back on the basis of very rapid exports recovery, which we see being 25% in 2021, but also related to what has already been mentioned in this conference, and what's the name of the conference, the inflow of the EU money, not just the usual structural cohesion fund, but the next generation or recovery and resilience funds for Croatia. And this inflow will be really large and will strongly impact the performance of the current and capital account. We still have around 6 billion of euros which have not been used from the current envelope, and we're seeing 24 billion euros coming into Croatia in next years, and that will certainly dominate the financial flows. Of course, it represents the opportunity for the economy to grow faster, but I would say it should also foster the structural reforms necessary not only to create a one-off growth on the back of the larger investments, capital accumulation, but also to spur the total factor productivity growth, which is a key for a sustainable convergence of Croatia as we move towards the euro. Labor market has been this time around not hit hard. We only saw at the peak 50,000 jobs lost. Drop of the employment in 2020 was only 1.5 percentage points, so much less again than we saw during the last recession in 2009. And this is largely due to the support, fiscal support provided to the economy, particularly to the labor market, keeping the jobs. And we also expect the labor market to recover rapidly, and it has already largely recovered as we speak. And soon I think Croatia will again talk about the lack of the labor force, which was probably the top problem of the businesses before the pandemics hit. Banking sector, which has, as Elizabeth has said, now entered into the single supervisory mechanism last year, together with the entry into the exchange rate mechanism. Banking sector is in a very good shape, I would say, very resilient. It has moved through the crisis without too many scars. The capital adequacy ratio is high, 24%, highly liquid. So it's ready not only to withstand the increase of the non-performing loans that we will see after the moratorium measures that we introduced with the start of the crisis expire, but is also capable of supporting the absorption of this large amount of the EU funds that will enter into Croatia in next years. There, the role of the banks will also be important. As you know, these funds are used only in some percentage points to fund the project. The rest should be financed either directly by the government or by the banking sector. And as we see a large inflow of funds, there will be also increasing growth for the banks to process maybe tens of thousands of individual projects to assess them. And they should also play a positive role in that process, given the shape in which the banking system is. Lastly, let me say a few words about also our road to the Eurozone. We have moved, I would say, a key step last year, entering into the exchange rate mechanism. Together with Bulgaria, Croatia is the first country that has in parallel joined what's there of the banking union, namely single supervisory mechanism, which Elizabeth mentioned, but also single resolution mechanism. And we plan to fulfill, of course, all the nominal convergence criteria as soon as possible. The first theoretical date of the euro entry would be 1st of January 2023, but it also depends on the meeting of the fiscal criteria. That itself, as I said in the beginning, is dependent on the overall economic situation, which is dependent on the epidemiological situation and the speed at which the containment measures will be removed this year. So there is a fair amount of uncertainty surrounding all our projections, but I'm quite confident that if not this year, Croatia will very soon meet all the nominal convergence criteria, because we have been meeting all the convergence criteria in the years prior to the entry into the ERM, in the years prior to the start of the pandemics. And I'm sure that we can again have the same macroeconomic data which would lead us into the Eurozone entry. And for Croatia, Eurozone entry, I would say, is a no-brainer, given that Croatia, I think, is the country that will benefit most by entering into the Eurozone, because its currency substitution is very high still, and that creates a larger foreign exchange risk than is the case with other countries which don't have such a high currency substitution. We have already benefited from our road to the Eurozone in the sense of the perception of the markets, of the rating agencies, and we have also got the help from the ECB in the spring, at the height of the crisis, end of the March, beginning of April, where Croatia was provided a swap agreement with the ECB, which at that time was a very important support. Let me stop here.
Okay, thank you very much for that really comprehensive summary, really useful. Let me introduce Paul Hilbers, Executive Director at the IMF, our next speaker. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Joan, and a very good morning to Elizabeth, who's in the same time zone as I am, and a very good afternoon to all the others, I think. It's a great pleasure for me to join such an expert group of speakers. Let me therefore begin by thanking The Economist for organizing today's event. Since I cannot possibly hope to address every intricacy of the vast topic at hand here in a few minutes, I hope to provide a bit more of a global perspective on Croatia's post-crisis prospects, so the international perspective, so to speak. But first things first, for Croatia, 2020 has effectively brought a triple shock, I would say. Like so many countries around the world, it suffered, of course, a tragic human loss due to the new COVID virus, and with it, the immense social and economic consequences of necessary restrictions, as already also mentioned by Boris. Furthermore, due to the significance of the tourism sector in the economy, these restrictions have had a disproportionately higher impact in Croatia than in many other countries.
Okay, Paul has frozen. We just lost you for just a brief few seconds there, Paul.
Okay.
So sorry to interrupt. You just froze. So maybe just to start your previous sentence again. We got up to the disproportionate impact of tourism on tourism.
Yes, clear. That was my second point, the second shock. The first one being COVID, the second one being a larger tourism sector, which affects the impact. And my third point was that, of course, the country had to endure two major earthquakes in Zagreb and the Banija region also, and I would like to express my sincere sympathy to all those affected by these shocks in Croatia. You can hear me now, right, Joan?
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Economically speaking, what these three shocks have in common, is their exogenous nature. They're outside the country's midst and would have affected the economy independently of the actions of any government that could have interfered. So while they do exert a huge economic impact, they do not determine Croatia's future growth path, which is more dependent on the country's fundamentals. In fact, on these fundamentals, there is ample reason to believe that Croatia will be able to rebound relatively quickly. In the 5 years leading up to the crisis, Croatia experienced robust growth of 2.5% to 3% in line with the euro area, combined with a profitable and well-capitalized banking system, as also highlighted by Boris just now. Unemployment was brought down from over 16% in 2015 to about 6% in 2019, in fact below the euro average. The government deficit was eliminated, the public debt was on a decidedly downward path and stood at around 70% just prior to the crisis. Looking ahead, the IMF, the Commission and the rating agencies all agree that Croatia will be among those European countries with the strongest recovery in 2021. The general consensus is of a rebound of about 5 to 6% in 2021. So apart from the country's solid pre-crisis fundamentals, what other factors make one optimistic about Croatia's economic fundamentals and growth potential. And that's the main point I want to make, and I want to mention 3 elements which may underpin a certain degree of optimism. First, already mentioned, the EU's Next Generation package. As part of this historic agreement, Croatia is set to receive the second highest amount of grants in per capita terms of over 1,500 euros per person, and these can be complemented by additional soft loans to really drive investments and secure sustainable growth. And the fund's advice on this package is clear: use the money. Use it on productive and growth-enhancing measures to foster the green transition and to drive the economy's digitalization. The funds can and should be used to reach the ambitious targets of the recently published National Development Strategy, notably in the area of climate change mitigation and adaptation. The money can be used to further increase the share of renewable energy from its already impressive 28%, which is significantly above the EU average. The recent public auction of renewable energy projects, for instance, is a good step towards the objective of 36% in 2030. The government's plans to increase the energy efficiency of buildings are equally important, given the relatively outdated building stock. Indeed, investment needs for the green transition are estimated at about 20 billion until 2030, so there is indeed ample room to make efficient use of the European funds. Making effective use of the money will be essential to avoid what our managing director has recently termed the great divergence. And indeed, the fund is increasingly cautioning against an uneven recovery across countries that could hamper growth in all countries. And as an open economy with within a single European market, this is all the more important, we feel, for Croatia. My second reason for optimism is Croatia's good reputation among investors. This continued confidence is evident in the confirmation of credit ratings, including the recent upgrade by Moody's, a stable outlook attested by all major rating agencies, and the large oversubscription of the country's recent Eurobond issue. And this is the result of years-long dedication to fiscal responsibility and rebuilding buffers following the global financial crisis. Croatia has shown that it cannot only talk the talk but also walk the walk, and the government's continued commitment is proven by its plans to put debt back on a downward trend in 2021, while ensuring a safe exit from the crisis as well as a stable recovery. Policymakers need to effectively balance risks from growing debt against risks of prematurely withdrawing fiscal support, that's the tension, which could delay the recovery. And against this backdrop, the fund advises to increasingly target support measures where possible. And it's precisely Croatia's proven ability to find this delicate balance that is a strong asset here. And a third reason to be optimistic is Croatia's continued commitment to closer integration with Europe, as also mentioned by the governor. In July, Croatia successfully entered the ERM2, as well as so-called close collaboration with the single supervisory mechanism and participation in the single resolution mechanism. There is a reason the ERM is called the Euro's waiting room, and it's an important step towards adopting the common currency, which would further bind Croatia into the common European destiny. This is a positive sign for Croatia's reputation, its banking sector, and ultimately its economy. Let me also assure you that this is no small feat, as it requires continuously meeting stringent criteria and key macroeconomic variables over a number of years. And it will continue to provide structure to macroeconomic choices in the efforts to foster a green, digital, and inclusive recovery. Continued structural reforms, as also highlighted by the governor, will indeed be essential to enable Croatia to integrate into the euro area and function smoothly thereafter. On this, let me conclude by highlighting my key points. In 2020, Croatia was hit by a triple shock of the COVID pandemic, which was exacerbated by 2 major earthquakes and the large share of tourism in the economy. Yet, recovery prospects, in our view, are good, as the country can count on solid pre-crisis fundamentals, which are complemented by the eligibility for a large amount of financing from Next Generation EU funds, the country's good reputation among investors, and third, Croatia's continued commitment to closer integration with Europe. Stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, that's all very clear, your three key points. So let's turn now to Krzysztof Schöfberg, the CEO at Erste Bank Croatia. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Joan, and thank you very much for inviting me also to this distinguished panel. It's a great opportunity to discuss Croatia's economic future and conversion story. And I fully share the comments made by my speaker just before, Paul Hilbers, on the macro level. Let me add, let's say, some information on the micro level, how we see it and how we feel it here on the spot. I mean, Croatia a year ago was on a clear path towards the euro and had a very consistent fiscal consolidation when, as Paul mentioned, three disasters struck. And as a result, a year after, I can see we still see remarkable resilience here. We have a relatively contained unemployment thanks to government measures supporting, I think, keeping employees in their jobs. We entered still the ERM2 on plan in July 2020. I think that was a great success for Croatia. And I think also here on a micro level, I think the companies and banks, I think, were very active. The banks introduced private moratoria within a very, very short time, implemented them. Many of them already expired, still a number are quite in place. And still we can see also the NPL level, the non-performing loans level, are very stable in Croatia. So we did not see an increase so far. Also, digitalization happened in an incredibly short time, and the banks went online while still providing all physical services to their clients uninterrupted. So this all happened in a matter of days, and we can say that also a year after, I think it has changed a lot of things. It has moved on, it has accelerated, so to say, many things here, many services, and I think that's a good trend. What we can see from the banking system and from the banking sector, as the government said, the banking sector in Croatia is a very stable, robust, and well-capitalized sector. I think it can serve as a backbone in the process of creating the recovery, the new economic growth, and that we will hopefully see. And Croatia definitely can overcome the current challenges and minimize the negative impacts that we see so far. But I think there are various things needed for that, various conditions, and some things we need to work on. Well, first of all, regarding the European Recovery and Resilience Fund, that is the topic of today, I think this time provides an important counter-cyclical capacity. If we compare it to 2008 and 2009, when the last big recession, let's say, struck the country, especially as also the fiscal potential is now more scarce. The public debt is higher than that point, and it's also in some way limited because, as mentioned by my speakers before, we are hopefully on a very clear path towards the euro implementation, and that also means, of course, further fiscal consolidation, which I think the Minister of Finance has already announced that he will pursue this as of this year already. So I think this is definitely a helpful additional factor that we can see right now. I think what we also saw before, prior to 2020 COVID, we saw that the fiscal consolidation already offered some fiscal room for cushioning. It also helped a little bit in mitigating the effects of COVID-19 in 2020. We of course believe that the Eurozone membership would offer even additional degree of safety and stability. So as banks in Croatia, we definitely fully support the introduction of the euro also as soon as possible. What we can add as a perspective from the investor, I think we do believe that although there were many steps, I think, done in improving the investment climate in general here in Croatia, especially from the side of the government, and especially the already mentioned fiscal consolidation, I do believe we need also to focus on some areas which need to be further focused on. One is local governance. And the other is legal framework predictability. I think these will remain one of the most important preconditions for sustainable progress in the investment area. I would like maybe to bring, regarding local governance, some positive examples and not negative ones. I think we do see remarkable examples of regions or cities which are doing a very good job in that. For example, in the north of Croatia, Varaždin or Čakovec, which is very much focused on export-driven industry. There is a city close to Zagreb, Sveta Nedelja, which I think has very speedy and very transparent public governance, investor-friendly, and also the one or the other city, let's say, on the coast. So we do see that good local governance is possible and is happening, but I think we wanted to see it on a much broader scale here in Croatia. Let's say towards the end, I think what we need here is a success combination of tourism, which is and will remain a very important, a vital part of the Croatian industry, but it should transform after COVID into a more sustainable backbone, which will provide, let's say, euro 10 billion or something like that plus revenues annually. Croatia should promote much more its ICT sector, its pharma sector, its quality food, e-mobility, logistics, and as well as their very good expert niche players in the SME area and promote their role as growth drivers. So much from my side. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Really good to get that more micro perspective there for our discussion afterwards. So let me introduce now Federico Barriga Salazar. Welcome, Federico, and over to you. Fitch, the perspective from the ratings, one of the ratings agencies.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Jones. Nice to see you, and good morning, afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to focus really my brief presentation of how we looked at the credit pre-pandemic and now what we're going to look at in the next couple of years. So Croatia's rating has improved quite significantly since 2014, and we upgraded them to investment grade, BBB- with a positive outlook in June 2019. And I think this was not primarily driven by sort of the growth story, but more importantly by the policy and structural factors. And here I wanted to highlight three. The first one would be obviously the fiscal performance. We've heard a lot about how Croatia performed in the last couple of years. For us, in particularly, the key thing to note is that it established sort of a solid track record of meeting fiscal targets, and this provided fiscal credibility, as well as sort of more fiscal space that allowed the country to tackle the crisis the way it did in 2020. The second important factor, and this was sort of touched by the governor briefly, is what happened in the external side. And I want to emphasize how remarkable the performance of Croatia on an external balance position was in the last 6 years, which I think is unparalleled across most of the countries in the BBB category and also compared to other EU countries. And by this I mean it was driven by solid current account surpluses and external deleveraging across both the private and public sector, which led to a very, very rapid decline in net external debt in the period. And this external improvement, what has done is created a lot of resilience to the economy, as evidenced by the fact that there was really no external pressure seen last year from our side. And this is, I think, a key distinction to what happened after and during the global financial crisis. The third aspect that it's important to highlight, and it's been highlighted already, is the drive to enter ERM2 with the goal of eventually adopting the euro. I think we at Fitch have been very clear and transparent that this process will have a positive net effect on the rating by the time sort of the process is concluded, and this is due to the fact that Croatia would have reserve currency status given the euro, obviously, and it also reduced sharply FX imbalances, which, as the governor mentioned, up to this point have been quite high in the economy. And the idea is that when the process is concluded, you could see eventually up to a 2-notch upgrade for this economy. So then the pandemic hit, and obviously this improvement credit track took a bit of a halt. Last April, we put the outlook back from positive to stable, given what we thought would be the pandemic effects on growth and public finances, as well as what we then thought could be delays in the process of accessing ERM2 and the euro. Clearly, on the latter, we proved to be wrong, and Croatia, as was mentioned earlier, entered the ERM2 in July. And is now on kind of following all the conditions, but the effects of the pandemic were pretty large, as discussed also before, leading to a sharp recession, a high increase in the public deficit, and it has brought public debt to about 86-87% of GDP, which is sort of the record high. So in this context, what do we think might happen with Croatia? I also have sort of three main ideas. The first one is an idea of resilience. what I described on the external sector, on the institutional anchors, and now obviously with all funds coming in from the European Union, what this does, in our view, is it really limits the downside risks to the rating. In a way, kind of puts a floor that is not available to a lot of other emerging markets around the world who would probably see still a lot of volatility these years given the pandemic risks. The second point to highlight is a little bit more on the growth outlook. And here is where we see, obviously, Next Generation EU and the Recovery Fund to play a key role. There's been a lot of discussion about some of the conditions, preconditions, and problems with it. What we have done, and to keep it short, is that we have made an assumption now, particularly for countries that are large net grant recipients like Croatia, on what would this impact, how would this play on our growth forecast for the next 5 years. So for 2022, 2025, for countries like Croatia, we could estimate growth to be up to 4 to 5%, which is quite substantial when you think about it. But I think from a long-term rating perspective, what's more important is to think about the medium to longer-term issues, which have been talked a lot about again, and in terms of productivity, on long-term growth. We haven't really made any assessment of this yet because there's a lack of detail on the final programs, and I think there's a lot of uncertainties of how efficient they would be. But it's important to note that we have sort of long-term potential growth as one of the key positive rating drivers, and maybe this could be something that gives an uplift to Croatia in the next 2 to 3 years. But the third, and I think most important point, is on the Euro story again, because this is really a fundamental institutional driver, as I mentioned before. And here I want to kind of incorporate the idea of public finances, and in particularly that we view the track record to be very solid, but we see risks here. And this could be, we think at Switch, that this could be the one area that perhaps Croatia would struggle meeting the convergence criteria, because we see it is difficult to balance the need to support the economy with the need to put in place the fiscal path that the Ministry of Finance and the government has set in place. So they're trying to reduce the deficit for about 8% last year to 3% in 2022, which among the European peers, it's one of the most sort of rapid paces of consolidation. So we see some risks here that could potentially delay to some extent the euro adoption. But in general, if we see that the short-term risk on the public finances and other items of euro adoption do not materialize, then this could potentially be a very sort of important and short-term driver for the credit rating going forward. I'll stop here. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much, Federico. So let me turn to our final speaker, Hrvoje Dolenec, who is the chief economist at Zagrebačka banka. Welcome.
Thank you, John. Hello to everyone. Well, there is so much already said by the previous speakers here on the outlook and banking system and the NGO. I would put just shortly 2 topics maybe to discuss, or maybe to bring some flavor to what we discussed today. Boris was talking about the potential factors of short-term or medium-term growth. One thing that we have missed to mention is the household spending. That was also went to doldrums during the pandemic and is here to wake up. We have seen a tremendous increase in net financial position of the households due to several factors. One thing is lower spending. The second thing is very generous fiscal support that the government gave throughout the pandemic, and there's actually few lost jobs against the expectations of a very big impact on the labor market. So basically we have the average wages also growing, the income growing, and this is one of the important short-term factors of growth, at least in this and next year, where the household spending will also recover with the improvement of the situation and decrease of the uncertainty. Of course, tourism depends on the vaccination and the immunization rate achieved, and this is something that is a risk to these expectations or projections. But I believe that all the participants and the economists in Croatia have the pretty similar forecasts and projections for this and next year in terms of growth. The other thing that I want to mention, maybe we already talked about this NGU allocation for Croatia, which is very generous, and Croatia has a big opportunity to use it. But maybe it's not clear. Nobody expects, at least from our side, we don't expect that it will bring very big impact in 2021 for the investments and recovery as an instrument, because it will be actually absorbed only from the beginning of 2022 or the late 2021. But there is another thing that Croatia have still in the pocket. There is unused allocation of the previous financial framework 2014-2020 that is roughly half of this money is not spent. All the projects are contracted, and this will have to be spent in next 3 years by the end of 2023. This is basically the run the investments in this medium-term growth, and this will be probably the big factor of the growth in 2021, as opposed to the expectation that NGU and other instruments that are allocated to Croatia will bring in the following years. My point also on some impediments to the long-term growth, though Croatia has now a big opportunity through NGU to address reforms that are needed not only to address productivity growth and long-term growth, but also to support its intention to accede to Eurozone as soon as possible. Of course, whether the environment will this allow or not in such speed, but there is an inevitable way towards the acceding the euro and accepting the euro as an instrument of payment in Croatia. Actually, another opportunity for the Croatian exports that have been very much benefiting from the EU accession in the past. There are these impediments. I'm talking now from the position of investors, and as we see also here in the banks, are some that already have been mentioned before. Mr. Schöfbeck was talking about these institutional reforms that have to be accelerated, that allow Croatia to use this opportunity to grow faster and to catch up with the convergence again, because we noted that there is a kind of lagging behind all the other convergence stories in the region. So basically all the countries are growing faster within the CE region and basically catching up with the main or the core EU countries. Now there is opportunity to employ these funds that are available to speed up the institutional reforms, because the NGO will be connected, and we know that for sure it will be connected to the different reform targets and criteria. And this will definitely be the opportunity to catch up and accelerate this convergence stories, revive the convergence stories for Croatia that was stalling for a couple of years now. Basically, this is something that I wanted to say for the beginning, and then we can discuss further during the discussion. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So actually raised quite a few questions there at the end that I think it would be useful to pursue in the discussion. So it's your presentations have been very wide-ranging, and overall I would say that the tenor of this discussion has been much more kind of optimistic, really, about the outlook for Croatia and about the possibility that of making sure that this unique opportunity provided by Next Generation EU will actually result in a big kind of step forward for Croatia in the coming years. So I guess I can try and be a bit of a devil's advocate and throw out some questions that have come up through the day. I think what we've heard is a really positive policy story here, and just about every single one of you have touched on that, really, that we've had a tale of two crises, if you like, for Croatia, and Croatia went into this crisis in a much stronger position than it entered the 2009 one, and that's really down to this very impressive fiscal consolidation efforts and other policy successes in the prior period. But I guess the question that arises for me is the kind of real convergence story, which has been quite disappointing for Croatia. I know several of you have touched on that, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time, if you like, about why that is. Why has Croatia been kind of convergence laggard? And do you see a tension here, which several of you have raised or pointed to, potential tension between nominal convergence targets and attaining real convergence, or speeding up the rate of real convergence for Croatia? I think that's a really central question, and how confident are you that you can do both, that you can achieve the nominal convergence targets under ERM2 to join the euro, and at the same time really spur growth in the coming period? And so I guess related to that, I wanted to ask you, are you concerned about the speed of the recovery and the speed of disbursement of these funds, which I agree they're not really going to come through until next year? Are you concerned about absorption capacity, given the track record of Croatia in recent years, which is below 50%, I believe, overall absorption capacity, which of course relates to the administrative capacity question? So what specifically and concretely can the authorities do to make sure that those mistakes are not repeated in future? So those are a few things to throw out. I'm encouraging the audience as well to ask some questions and just checking if something come in. But let me go back and start at the beginning again. And I guess a question specifically for, first of all, Elizabeth, who kicked off. Somebody this morning, actually a former chair of the Eurogroup, Jeroen Dijsselbloem, raised a question about the ECB and the kind of long arm of the ECB, which has kind of got longer in this crisis, and the mandate of the ECB, which some have questioned. Just it'd be nice to hear from you how you see the ECB's role over the coming year and even beyond, and whether you see the ECB stepping back and nation states taking on more of the role that you have played over the past year. So over to you, Elizabeth. I'll start with you and then come to the governor.
Thank you. There's a lot in your question, and so just a couple of points. I think it's also, I was rather focused in my remarks about convergence and the strength of convergence and the strength of cooperation, and I can't underscore enough how. To me, it is completely unthinkable that we would have approached this pandemic without an SSM and have been where we are today with an optimistic outlook that is expressed by my esteemed colleagues on the panel. But the World Bank report had a line in it that's probably worth reiterating. And it was a conclusion, and it was, if you can be part of the formidable European convergence machine, you do not need to be extraordinarily fortunate to become prosperous, nor, like the East Asian tigers, do you have to be ferocious. You just have to be disciplined. Discipline is really important at this particular moment, and it means we need to take steps together and I speak from a supervisory point of view with the strength and the resilience of the banking sector, to make sure that we're recognizing where there's real credit losses that are occurring on the books, and we are disciplined about making that transparent, making that visible, so that we don't cause pro-cyclicality as we emerge through a recovery. I think this is going to be the most important thing. Some of the colleagues have mentioned the savings levels have increased. There's quite a lot being written about, what the expectations for GDP growth are, that will be likely helped by some of these savings. but also helped by the funds, even if it's next year. So you can look to the positive on the GDP growth picture. But all of that will be for naught if we're not disciplined about how we together, and I really emphasize the together, are making sure that the credit risk management processes are in place where you have moratoria and fiscal supports that might be masking true credit picture. We've got to get underneath that and recognize it and move our lending books through the staging. That's going to be absolutely critical to have that discipline.
Very much. Over to you now, Governor, to respond to any of those questions or indeed any of the comments from the other panelists.
Yes, thank you, Joy. I would say also that we had kind of two periods, two tales in terms of the convergence process in Croatia, or maybe even three if you go enough back into the past. One was the 90s, dominated by the war still there, where the convergence was lacking because we were in a conflict situation and getting out of it. Then was 2000s, when Croatia did not join the EU, as most other countries of Central East Europe, transition countries joined. Most of them joined in 2004 with Romania and Bulgaria in 2007. We have not joined until 2013. That has also hindered to a large extent the convergence potential of Croatia. And then post 2013, when Croatia actually recovered in a healthy way. So it was I would say it was a mix of macroeconomic policies, which were well, not because I'm a governor, but which were right at that time, both fiscal and monetary, but also because of the fact that Croatia did join the European Union, which helped a boom in the exports. There's a nice recent paper of the DGF in European Commission explaining the Croatia's export boom, which nicely analyzes how that has happened. And I would say up until the pandemic, since the Croatia joining of the EU, things were really developing very nicely. And I have little doubt to now that the same will continue post-pandemic and then post the Eurozone entry, which I think will be another boost to the Croatia's potential for convergence. Having said that, if you look at the obstacles that Croatia faced, or the reasons why it lacked the speed of real convergence in the past, I would say it was primarily a relatively slow total factor productivity growth. Most of the convergence was patterned on the capital accumulation. Most of the transition countries had a relatively low contribution of the labor accumulation due to the demographics primarily. And the capital accumulation was dominated in Croatia, again, compared to other countries, with a relatively high share of the government investments. Now, having said that, this is also mostly a consequence of the pre-GFC Great Financial Crisis period up to 2008, where Croatia invested a lot in the highways and the road infrastructure. Later on, the things have changed. It was a private investments that dominated, also because Croatia joined EDP. And now in the future, what we expect, and that has been also said at this panel, is that another large wave of public investments will come with the absorption of these funds. The key thing I believe is, although there is no doubt that this large inflow of funds, whether it's going to be a bit higher or lower depending on the absorption capacity, this is more a question for the government, but there will be a large inflow of funds and it will spur the growth. So there will be a high growth of GDP. But the key thing is to make this growth not simply capital accumulation which will temporarily lift up the growth rates, but to change the composition of growth in the direction of a higher total factor productivity growth than just the capital accumulation, because that makes the future growth then beyond the medium term, long-term growth higher, or this growth that we will see in the medium run more sustainable. And that means also changing the composition of the investments, favoring more higher GVA growth value added parts of the manufacturing, ICT sector, and one of the key cornerstones of these funds distribution will be a digital economy, which I think is a very good thing, and the more rapid switch from extensive labor capital based sectors to the intensive growth. I think this is a key for a future convergence. Of course, investment in the human capital that comes with the debt.
Thank you, Paul Hilbert. Can I turn to you next for your view on any of these questions?
Yes, Joe. Let me make just a few comments. First, I mean, we are looking at Croatia from a global perspective, as I said at the outset of my presentation. So it's one of the 190 member countries of the IMF, and we look at a lot of countries, compare a lot of countries, and when we do so, what do we see here? And maybe interesting, sort of, to have that perspective also. First, we see the enormous impact that the EU has as a disciplining mechanism. I think Croatia is a very clear case where that had really augured very well for the country. Fiscal, the external sector was mentioned by the representative from Fitch. Monetary policy, banking supervision, in all these areas you see the great value of moving towards Europe. Secondly, we see that when you stabilize an economy, it can be done. I mean, as you know, the IMF gets a lot of discussions on is stabilizing something that you should do? Is it not harmful to populations, to social issues, etc.? But I think Croatia has shown it can be done and it can actually help. And it has also helped, that's my third point, to create the buffers that it now uses to overcome these three shocks. So this is, I would say, the good news. Europe helps, stabilization is a good thing, and the buffers are there now to be used. Now, your point about convergence, I think, is very topical. I just want to mention the fact that it's not just a Croatian issue. You see the convergence issue pop up in many places in Europe. Actually, the first 10 years of the euro area, I think, were really the time when convergence was increasing rapidly. Countries were moving together, and since then, so it's already for a longer time that we see in many more countries the convergence being an issue. What can you do about it? What is behind it? It's not very easy. I think what you can do about it at least is to work on structural reforms. Things like, I mean, it can be very, very practical things, but things like good insolvency legislation so that the industry can move from one phase to the other. But also things like, for instance, good education is important. Because one thing that we see in Europe is also labor migration. And you can build the perfect country, but if the people move out of the country because they go to other places where they find better opportunities, that is still a difficult thing. So invest in education, I would say, is important here. But also more generally, I think the next step, once you have stabilized the economy, is to work on investment in greening the economy, investment in infrastructure, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure. So I think that would be the next step, and that would be my answer to the issue of convergence. I think it's very important now to use the funds that are coming to Croatia or are potentially available to Croatia wisely. This is, I think, the great challenge will be use the money wisely. It's coming to you, it's available to you, use it wisely, and then I'm confident that also this issue of convergence can be tackled with. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Yes, and of course we've seen from the experience of some in Southern Europe that EU membership or even Eurozone membership is not a panacea for convergence and growth, because we've actually seen divergence going on in Southern Europe as well, and now countries in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, the Visegrad countries actually leapfrogging some of these Southern European countries, which is interesting. So, as you say, it's not just a Croatia problem at all. So let me bring in Christoph now for your comments.
Thank you, Joan. So coming back to what you asked regarding the conversion story of Croatia, I think definitely things need to speed up here. So what we said before is also that Croatia made a big leap forward in decreasing its economic deficiencies and the disparities. And I think here we are much stronger now than 10 years ago. However, we did not move on as much as we should and could, I think, on the conversions to the European Union economic standards in general. And some of the things I mentioned before, let me maybe elaborate in 1 minute, let's say, on some of them again. I do share your concern about the absorption capacities of these funds that are coming in. I do see them as a real chance and as a big boost for the recovery of Croatia. At the same time, I think we have to really make our job, all of us together, well, in order to absorb these funds in an efficient way, and also enable the distribution to the private sector, so that not all ends up in infrastructure projects, which I think by definition cannot happen. But I think really absorption needs to be a focus of all of us. Second, I mentioned the local governance. I presented some positive cases on purpose, because there are also a number of negative cases of more passive municipalities where things are not moving on very, very fast, where you have very slow procedures in place, very slow approvals of projects, and I think the country as all needs to change on that. We see islands of dynamic growth, but not yet overall. And the third item is that we really do have still legal processes which take a long time. There are some endless processes which investors have to do, both domestic and foreign investors. Again, I think we have some positive examples, but that definitely should move forward. So I think there is a lot of work to do in these areas. Coming back to the growth and modernization, as I mentioned before, the positive thing I see with Croatia this time, in comparison to, let's say, 10 years ago, we do have new companies which develop quite quickly. The governor already mentioned shortly the ICT sector. I think we even have 2 unicorns now already in Croatia, which are really making a tremendous job. And we do have I think positive islands also, I would say, for example, the Istra region for sustainable and quality tourism, which is really has advanced enormously in the last 10 years. So I also mentioned the export-driven SMEs in the north of the country, I think, which really provide a good hope that the convergence will speed up. Again, we need to work on the issues that we are still having, and I mentioned them before. If we do that, I still share, of course, the optimistic view that Croatia, jointly with the good usage of the recovery and resilience funds provided by the European Union, has a very good chance to move forward much faster in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. Over to you now, Federico. Just maybe if you could just talk about what you would see as what you would identify as a kind of key risk on the kind of fiscal front over the next few years, kind of beyond this coming year.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I think the short-term risks are really how to support the economy while trying to achieve rapid consolidation in the next 2 years. I mean, let's say we can have 3 buckets now of countries in the EU. Most of them are trying to consolidate gradually. Some are actually even increasing the level of support in 2021. And conversely, the public sector deficits would increase as well. And Croatia is really one of the few that is really trying to achieve something that we think is going to be challenging, but it's not impossible because they have a very sort of solid track record. And there was even a reform on the tax system that came into place this year, which could seem even counterintuitive. But if there's strong growth, that would actually support the revenue intake. So it's not all bad, but I think it also depends on how the situation in the health sector does and the pandemic. So that's really much more short term, which, as I mentioned in my introduction, that could delay the process of the euro adoption. But more medium term risks, I mean, the next generation in itself doesn't really play a massive role in the fiscal accounts. It kind of supports the macroeconomy. It could give you some fiscal incentives, but it really then also depends on anchoring, on following fiscal rules. And I do wonder also what would happen in the event that there is another government. I mean, I have to sort of say this clearly. I mean, we've seen this under this government, a very good track record, but that wasn't the case on other constellations. So maybe up until we sort of pass that test, or we see somebody else coming into play and maintaining that fiscal structure, then we could really say, Croatia now has a very solid fiscal framework. And I do share the concerns that some people have actually mentioned in other discussions that, it seems at some point that those anchors, institutional anchors, like ERM, like joining the euro, are very good while that is in place, but then would that kind of change the incentives afterwards? I think it's another question, but it's not so relevant at the moment, I think, for the rating, but it could be an issue depending kind of, again, on political developments, on economic developments. So I think those would be the only sort of two things from our point of view to watch over the medium term. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Federico. So I'm actually going to give the final word, because we've run over on time, the final words to Mr. Dolanets. There's quite a lot to pick up on there. So feel free to come back on any of the questions that have been raised.
You have raised very, very many questions, but let us give kind of overview. There's like two stable pillars that we have. We had one even before, so monetary policy was always a stable pillar of the economy. We had then joined the fiscal stability as another pillar. So there is a third pillar that actually is one that have to be addressed through this process onwards, through this euro convergence story and through using the AGR, Recovery and Resilience Funds, for actually recovery and creating the long-term potential growth. This is this institutional reform, or whatever you call it, institutional setup that can comprise, together with administrative burden, better performance of the judiciary system, especially those in commercial matters that are very crucial for the business environment. And there's one other thing that I would point out that should be addressed in following period, especially if the growth is there and we have this positive story, positive environment. Maybe a little bit contradictory. We are expecting a lot from the government to be done in this process, but yet again we see something that Croatia has as a characteristic. This is a big involvement of the government in the economy. We still have pretty big ownership of the state-owned enterprises and even the companies that are pretty much market companies, but with the big involvement in the government in governance of this. And we always have presented as one of the important steps towards increasing the competitiveness and also the productivity in the country is to try to privatize companies that have not to be run by the government here. This is one of the questions that I was also raised as a part of this institutional change that Croatia has to do to improve their real convergence story. One other thing that I wanted to mention, maybe even before, is and it was also raised by the Mr. Salazar, actually this fiscal stability, in terms that how obvious is that we will continue with fiscal consolidation, but because there's a big discussion within the European economy, and we've seen in the global economy basically that economies need strong fiscal support to get momentum to recovery. US is actually leading this pack of the big fiscal support. Eurozone is actually lagging behind, and then we have also the country, but also have big fiscal schemes, and then we have countries like Croatia that wants to return to fiscal consolidation. but yet we are not sure whether this recovery or momentum will be achieved without the fiscal support in early months or early quarters of the recovery. This is one of our also our risk that we run in our predictions or projections for this year before the economy just get the momentum.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time for further questions. We did receive a few more questions, but I'm afraid we're going to intrude too much on the next session on the important tourism sector. So I want to thank you all very much indeed. I think you covered a lot of ground in your introductions and in answering those questions so well. So thank you very much indeed, all of you. It's been great talking to you, and I'm sure everybody listening has enjoyed hearing your remarks. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now going to have a 10-minute break, and we'll join for the final session. Goodbye. Thank you. Welcome everyone to our final session of the day at the end of this very important discussion about Croatia. This is a very important session looking at the tourism sector and the prospects for tourism in the coming years. I'm going to hand straight over to George Tsialis, who will moderate this session and introduce the speakers. George is a well-known tourism expert for the region of the North Aegean, former General Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism of Greece. And he will be moderating this panel, and I will be coming back at the end to close proceedings at the end of the session. So over to you, George. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your nice introduction. Thank you for the nice work and good work and that you had today. Difficult, it was difficult, but it was fruitful. It was very, very interesting. And I would like to thank also the Economist that always includes me in tourism conferences for so many years, and Nectaria, of course. We have a great panel today. We have to keep up the spirits because it's the last panel, but it's a very important panel because it's about tourism, and always a tourism panel is always very important when we're talking, especially for countries like Croatia, like my country, where tourism offers to GDP more than 20% every year. So it's very, very important, and it's also very important because we have very distinguished guests in the panel. And it's good also that all these guests are coming from different positions, from the governmental position, from the political side, from the private sector, from the consulting side, and of course from the world-known World Travel and Tourism Council. And it's so important. And also, it's also very important for me, and I'm very happy to join this panel and to moderate this panel because I know Croatia. I love the country for many, many years, not only from my position in the Ministry of Tourism as a Secretary General, but also because I've been there before, and I would plan to be there in the future, and have very good friends in the tourism. So, no further ado from me. I introduce in our panel the speakers of today's panel is the Lady Minister from Republic of Croatia, Mrs. Nikolina Brinjak. Sorry if I don't pronounce your name very well. It happens also with my last name all the time. But Nikolina, Madam Minister, it's nice to have you with us. Also, my friend from the past and colleague, Mrs. Gloria Guevara, the President and CEO of WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council. Hello, Gloria. My friend Aurelis Slonim, who reminded me a couple of days ago that we have met each other, and of course we have met each other in some of the conferences that I attended in Croatia. Good morning, Aureli. Aureli is the president of the management board of Arena Hospitality Group with many hotels, and he is here from the private sector that will give us, the private sector. One from every position will add to the discussion today. We have a politician, we have WTTC, we have from the private sector, because it's the private sector that will boost the economy. And of course, we have from my favorite consulting, management consulting, in which sector I've been for 30 years now, and I have collaborated with Ernst & Young in Greece for many years. Maida Pavlekovic, very good, my pronunciation with your name, I believe, partner and consulting services leader, Maida from Ernst & Young, Croatia. So please, let's start. I would like to have a very lively and free discussion. So if you keep the 4 or 5 minute presentation of your speech or your presentation, then we have more time for discussion. And you would love to have that, because it's, the end of the day, tourism is what we love and what we do for it, for the economy. So please, Madam Minister, Nikolina, we have the honor to listen to you very carefully, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear panelists, dear Mr. Tsalas, did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, perfect. I would prefer to call me George, though, and Yorgos, but
George,
please feel
okay.
free to call me anyway.
I would like to thank the Economist for organizing this event and dedicating one of the panels to the position of Croatian tourism within the Recovery and Resilience Facility. As we all know, Croatian GDP, and you mentioned it, relies quite heavily on the tourism revenues, and therefore it is clear that tourism must be assisted in its recovery and resilience building as much as possible. Last year, Croatia recorded a serious decrease of overnight stays in commercial accommodation capacities by 50% compared to 2019. And this year, we are still faced with a more unpredictable situation in the tourism and travel sector than we had hoped for. We believe that investing in tourism now will provide long-term benefit to communities, visitors, and businesses through all Europe. And our investments in tourism from the recovery and resilience facilities have two main goals. First, assisting quick recovery of the hardest hit sector in the global economy, also producing beneficial effects on connected economic activities. Secondly, directing short and medium-term investments towards our strategic goal, a sustainable tourism ecosystem. Our National Recovery and Resilience Plan is an opportunity for a strategic push forward with a sustainable financial basis. With the help of reform and investments through medium and term goals and specific measures that will contribute to a green and digital transition, we plan to address the following strategical challenges of the Croatian tourism. An insufficient level of tourism sustainability reflected in the uneven seasonal and territorial distribution of tourist demand, setting Croatia among countries with the highest index of tourism intensity in the Mediterranean region, and an insufficient level of quality and balance of the accommodation capacity structure, since hotels in Croatia represent only 11% of the total accommodation capacities. The overall reform will support sustainable tourism through green and digital transition, and this will be elaborated in our new strategy for the development of sustainable tourism until 2030, and the national plan for the development of sustainable tourism from 2021 until 2027. The reform will support the improvement of businesses' environment through additional adjustments of legislative framework to reduce the administrative burden and to improve the tourism sector competitiveness. To achieve full impact, the reform will be complemented by necessary public investments, which will contribute to regional diversification and destination specialization, as well as private investments that will accelerate the green and digital transition in tourism sector and improve the competitiveness and resilience of businesses throughout the tourism value chain. The Recovery and Resilience Plan and funding available through the Recovery and Resilience Plan are a very important step forward in our strategic repositioning of Croatian tourism. As already mentioned, we will continue with this important work through the implementation of our new sustainable tourism strategy as a long-term framework for the tourism development. However, our first objective now is to employ the full potential of the EU budget to mobilize investment and front-load financial support for the sector in the crucial first years of the recovery. Thank you.
You are exactly in time. You were exactly presenting what we said. It is very interesting that you said, Madam Minister, that sustainable tourism is the core idea and the core intention of your ministry, and of course in your country the next coming years, to take full advantage of the EU Recovery Fund and every funding from the EU. It was nice to hear from you, because it's good that we hear such ideas, especially for my country. And we go on to Mrs. Guevara Gloria. We all know the work that WTTC does for so many years, and of course I appreciate your work so much. And of course, you know that You're a good friend and good collaborator, and I hope I will contribute sometime in your efforts. Please, the floor is yours. We expect with great pleasure to see your presentation, and we need to learn from this. Please.
Thank you, George. Thank you for, great to see you again, my dear friend. Thank you for the invitation. Minister, thank you for joining us today. It's very important to have you here. And of course, the distinguished panelists that are joining me. I have a quick presentation. I don't know if we can share that quickly. If not, I can talk about it. Excellent. Thank you. First of all, let me thank you for inviting the global private sector, a little bit over 200 CEOs from around the world, as you know, part of WTTC. And we represent all the industries from airlines, hotels, cruises, destinations as well. And these are just some of the faces. And of course, they are very interested in investing and the work as they have also travelers to Croatia. If we move to the next slide, please. The COVID has been an unprecedented crisis, and unfortunately, the impact to our sector has been devastating. 174 million jobs globally have been impacted. In Europe, it's a little bit over 23 million jobs. And when I'm saying impacted, this is a combination of jobs that unfortunately have been lost, and also some jobs that have been furloughed or have decreased the number of hours. Currently, we have different rules, different type of tests, different vaccination rollouts, different apps and solutions for health passes, on clear mobility rules, and protocols based in every destination, which is adding a very complexity to the current situation. Now, next slide, please. The question here that we believe is important to answer is, how do we achieve a fair balance between public health, that is top priority for WTTC and for governments and for all of us, while at the same time, we have some issues as a result from COVID. Mental health has increased, problems, domestic abuse. We have seen an increase in the social impact because of the lack of travel and the lack of tourism. Of course, in some nations, in some countries, we have seen an increase in poverty, job losses, economy, and on top of everything, unfortunately, even exploitation. Next, please. So what we have been engaged with governments and different organizations is that how can we achieve an international mobility protocol by working together? In one end, we need to think about how do we move from country assessment to individual assessment, because individuals are the ones that are getting COVID. So if someone has been tested and tested positive for COVID, that individual should be put in quarantine. We believe that there's no one solution that fits all. So we need to do rapid testing before departure so that we can avoid exporting or importing COVID, and or a vaccination certificate. Both of these digital certificates will go in an app that consumer or travelers can have in their phone. And of course, that in addition to the safe travel protocols, which is wearing the mask, the hygiene, the distance, and all the things that we know, that will take us to safe travel and the right protocols to resume mobility. It is very important to be aligned to resume mobility, because if we don't resume this international mobility, we're not going to be able to achieve the balance that I mentioned before. Next slide, please. So basically, what we are talking in WTTC, that the principles to safely restore it is crucial to have this international coordination. We work very well with the EU. In the case of Croatia, it was mentioned, well, 10% of the global GDP is a contribution for travel and tourism, according to our data. For Croatia, was 25% in 2019. International is very important. 89% of the total contribution was international, and leisure, of course, is very important compared to business. So this international coordination is crucial in order to resume mobility. We need to continue with the health and hygiene protocols, wearing the mask in all forms of transportation and during the travel experience, the sanitization. We also have to implement the testing, low-cost testing before departure, so that we avoid exporting the virus. and of course, using the technology and the solutions available to identify the people infected and assign those infected to specific quarantines. And technology for these green passes, as the EU has been calling them, and to continue having the support from governments, that is crucial to resume international travel. Thank you. Bottom line, a lot of livelihoods have been impacted. And as WTTC, we are engaged with governments in advocacy for the benefit of these livelihoods so that we can resume back the jobs that have been lost and the jobs that have been affected. Thank you for the invitation again.
Gloria, I understand. Thank you so much. I understand that it's a situation that we need to find a balance, exactly what you said, with safety and mental health. I mean, just to put it this way, because everybody, we are locked in. We don't like what we are doing now because we are doing through a computer and not in a real live event. And I hope soon we can do it, but we can do it with protocols, as you said. Tourists have to travel with protocols. There has to be a consensus on that. And it's very, very important to start doing it because we cannot stand enclosed in our homes and in our countries without traveling. And this is the sense. Now, I come to my friend Relly, and you know that how much I believe in the private sector because I come from the private sector, right? And and the private sector is responsible of bringing me to Croatia in the first place because HESA Group, which is the co-organizing group with this event, and my friends there, it's great important. They come from the private sector, they come from the tourism, and they come from conferences and exhibitions. How is the situation? Please, we would like to hear from you how the private sector will deal with all this situation. Because you put the money, you need to make money out of it, but you need to treat the visitors in a safe way, and health is the primary care. Please, we are listening to you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the opportunity today to present the hospitality industry side. It's a very rattling and difficult period. We're going through a period. Our main challenge is confronting daily uncertainty on having business dependent on state measures which we do not control. I would like to touch the topic of the industry changes and adapting requirements and resulting funds needed of that. The industry is going through heavy financial challenges, but not only that, also major operational changes required, such as contactless and digital process development, medical service, changes in client habits, and future meeting and events and corporate business. Who knows? We don't really know where it's going to. We have hotels and camps on the seashore, on the resort, but we have also city hotels, and we really don't know where the corporate is going to. Companies are going through a very hard time during the pandemic. We will find that they require substantial funds, not only to open, but to adjust operation. The payroll support came as major help, but we must find ways to support revenue loss or cover additional costs, which we see now in some of the European countries. It's a big help to our operation in Germany. There must be a plan combining touristic entities with the state regarding the medical checks. Our biggest problem we see in the industry is confusion of messages regarding travel. This causing a major problem to our sector. We have to have European web coordinated and providing update travel and vacating possibilities. It's impossible for people now just, to leave Germany and not to know on the way to Istria, can they go through Slovenia? Can they go for Austria? We need to have one route. We have investment in course. Few new investments started prior pandemics and went through it. And they suffer longer construction time, problematic import of goods. We have a loss of a year or more of option, and you can understand what that makes or does to the financial of such a project. It's required to find a way to help in grants and specific loans for investments that started prior to the pandemic and help complete the renovation. It will be terrible to have skeletons along the coast of Croatia. It needs to be clear that the industry will have a learning curve of new habits and requirements. It will take a few seasons to stabilize after the pandemic and really understand our new operations. I feel that the cooperation with the ministries and financial institute in Croatia is really going well. But we must make sure for a mutual recovery plan for the coming 3 years, taking into account the 30 billion available and clear guidance how to tap into the funds and fully utilize them in order really to recover the industry, which is going through a very, very rattling time. So really, this is what we're confronting, and I'll be happy to have the discussion what can be to support us. Thank you.
You're doing very well with your government, and this is very, actually very useful for your sector. And it's quite interesting that all the efforts are joint efforts, and these should be in this way, of course, between the government and the private sector. But I understand also that there has to be a consensus at a European level, on a European level, about how we confront and how we impose measures, because it's not a matter within one country, like it is in my country, in Greece. It's a matter of the measures that they are in place in other countries. Because if visitors or tourists from abroad, we had to face a different situation than different measures in different countries, then this will be a problem. Now I'm coming to, thank you again, thank you really. Now I'm coming to Maida, who she's very, expecting, last but not least, in our English language. You're coming from the private sector, from the consulting. I like the consulting sector I've been working with. And also, please, I would like to hear from you, because the private sector and the consulting sector does things also on, of course, advisory, on new technologies, on new prospects for the future. So I would like to hear from you also about how this digital metamorphosis will bring some added value to the sector. Please, the floor is yours. We are all ears to hear from you what you are going to say, and very interesting things, I hope. Please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It is nice to be here with you today. This topic is already very hot, and a lot of wise thoughts were shared already. As you all know, tourism is the most important engine of Croatian economy, of its growth, and it has suffered really serious damage due to the biggest crisis that has hit the last 100 years. This is a sector that feeds many Croatian families, attracts foreign direct investments, motivates individuals for taking up entrepreneurial ventures, and it also opens job positions. As most of you already know, and it was already mentioned, Croatia is the country with the biggest share of tourism in GDP in the whole European Union. And until 2020, the revenues from the tourism in Croatia were continuously growing, and they peaked in 2019 with a value of more than 10 billion euros. And that represented almost 20% of Croatian GDP. Also, almost 20 million tourists visited Croatia and realized over 90 million overnight stays. And before the pandemic outbreaks, the projections were positive. Further growth of Croatian tourism was anticipated. However, no one expected a drastic downfall in Croatia in 2020. The numbers already previously mentioned may be shocking, 60% in the numbers of tourists and 55% of the overnight stays, but they show the real picture of our country that in the last decade was investing in tourism to foster the economic growth. What to do next and how to recover from this recession are the most important questions arising from the challenge that both Croatia but also the rest of the world are currently facing. As a member state, Croatia is eligible for funding from RRF and shall initiate reforms and investments that would enable recovery of Croatian tourism in the short run, but also green and digital transition and positively influence on the well-being not only of visitors, but also residents and businesses. Tourism in Croatia shall be a sector that will continue boosting Croatian economy, but we have to be aware that we can't rely completely on tourism industry as before. It needs to be sustainable in long run, resilient, and also shall be deeply restructured. Croatia can't be further perceived as a sea, sun, and sand destination. In the future, an emphasis should be on developing selective and sustainable tourism that is known for tourism products diversification. For example, like health, sport, congress, luxury, continental tourism instead of only seasonal, and massive tourism on the Adriatic. In the future, promotional activities should be focused on indicating the sustainability factors that are present in certain local and regional areas. Since a large percentage of tourists today consider green tourism necessary and fundamental for further growth of the destination. Therefore, an incentive condition for motivating all stakeholders to conduct green behavior is identified. And last but not least, a digital transition shall be ensured by introducing new e-services to minimize the administrative burden imposed to the entrepreneurs in the tourism sector, and by using digital technologies to create unique and high-quality touristic products and services. In addition, all tourist workers should get the chance to improve their competencies, skills, and knowledge related to the industry, as well as their digital skills. By introducing these types of reforms and investments, Croatia will be perceived as a safe destination that is taking a leap towards digital and green transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maida. I fully agree, of course. Sustainability, digital support, skills, upgrade of skills, and also we can go hand in hand, Croatia and Greece, because we have the same contribution of tourism to the GDP. We have the same hopes for the future. My work in the region of North Aegean, we promote thematic forms of tourism, as you said, and because now it's tourism to feel an experience, to live an experience, and also to have great activities in all these places to visit. Now, I'm afraid we are running out of time. So we could go on, because as I said at the beginning, tourism is always very interesting. Let's have 8 minutes more, I believe, to have some discussions. I have a discussion I have put actually some questions for me, but let's do it freely. I have a discussion from the audience that says that, and maybe I can address it to the Madam Minister, Nikolina. People are asking that we know that it's a collapse in culture, it's a collapse in the cultural sector in terms of events and exhibitions and everything. Also in tourism, for MICE tourism, for events and exhibitions, which is very important for your country also. Is there a plan in the resilience funds or in other funds that the government would put to support all these festivals and exhibitions and conferences and all these international activities that would bring money, of course, and would revive again the tourism and cultural sector, and of course sports tourism in your country, because you are responsible for that also. Please open your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Switch on? Yeah. Sure, it's okay. Please.
Okay, you can put it up. Okay. So, as you said, the main target of our efforts, as elaborated in National Recovery and Resilience Plan, lies in achieving a recovery of the whole tourism industry. As you mentioned, the whole industry is and it's increasing its resilience and its sustainability, and the whole industry needs to be sustainable and competitive through all the dedicated sectoral measures. Our long-term goal is defined by the National Development Strategy until 2030, and we are now in process of doing this strategy. We are encouraging investments in, as you mentioned in the beginning, in sustainable, low-carbon growth of the tourism, increasing the multiplier effect tourism, on the agriculture, on the sports, on the culture, on the digitalization, diversifying all the tourism aspects, as well as the creative industries, and many more. So, as mentioned earlier, the overall reform will support sustainable tourism through green and digital transition, like Maida also mentioned, and this will be elaborated in details through the strategy for the development of the sustainable tourism until 2030, together with the national plan for the development of sustainable tourism, which we are for the first time doing. The national plan is going to be from 2021 until 2027, as well as the strategic environmental impact assessment, which we are also for the first time doing regarding the strategic development. These key priorities will also be supported through the operational programs for the new programming period, 2021 and 2027, where we plan the long-term measures that will contribute to the tourism development. We are confident that our approach, which combines urgent short-term recovery measures with strategic thinking and with the reforms, will bear excellent results for the Croatian recovery and the resilience of the Croatian
Thank you so much. Now, Gloria, I will ask you, what are the first two things, one or two things that we have to do it tomorrow? I mean, we have to do it yesterday. We have to do it tomorrow. What do you think? What do Europe, the countries, I don't know, what do we have to do? Just two priorities that we know starting from tomorrow.
Thank you, George. I think the priority, the most important is to have an agreement, because the main challenge has been, and I'm talking globally, is the lack of coordination among countries. So within Europe, if we can have a protocol where it's very clear, I think Relly mentioned also the certainty, right? How do we provide certainty? We need to have a clear protocol so that people know. I'm based in London, and if I wanted to travel to Croatia, for instance, if I can perform a test before departure, and that test is digitalized in an app, and that's accepted on my arrival, then I don't have to perhaps do another test. Or having vaccinated, I have a digital as well certificate that would allow me to travel, depending on what is the case. We need to have clear rules, and clear rules provide certainty to the travelers, and that would allow us to resume mobility. That's the priority number one. And the priority number two is to continue with the protocols. Very important to continue wearing the mask, continue with the physical distance, the sanitization. We issue safe travel protocols. The private sector defined those last year. I think the private sector has stepped up and has been very successful. Now we need to continue reinforcing those protocols, and the traveler has to respect those protocols so that we can avoid the spread, we can avoid exporting or importing the virus, and we can resume international travel or regional travel that would allow us to bring back the jobs impacted. So those two things, the protocols with clear rules so that everyone knows exactly what's expected, and we can have a strong summer and a strong second half of the year. And the first one is, let's make sure that we continue respecting the protocols, and those protocols are very important. And of course, we're very grateful for the governments, including Croatia, with the wonderful support that we have received, because that's very important to continue. We need to continue with that support during the recovery. It was not only good last year, we have to continue the entire 21 with that support as well for the survival of the sector.
Well, thank you so much. You know, one of the reasons that I admire you is because you are always to the point. And exactly what you said is so much interesting. I would like to have a question, because Joan I actually wanted to ask you something, and I would be very glad if I ask her to put a question, and so we can contribute to the thing. It's please, John. It's we listen to you. Switch on your mic, please.
I think they're connecting.
Please say it again. It's now. It's okay. It's okay. Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, George. So a question for Minister Brunyac, first of all. Today we heard many speakers say that Croatia needs to diversify away from tourism, and put more resources into other sectors. Does that worry you, that the sector might receive insufficient support? Do you think actually you should be rather focusing on maximizing the potential of the tourism sector rather than thinking about diversifying away from it? And for our private sector colleagues, and also for Gloria, how do you have any assumptions about what is going to happen this summer? You said so many things are beyond your control. How worried are you about this third wave, this slow rollout? Do you think it's even possible that the tourism season could be worse this year unless we get these protocols agreed very, very quickly? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think that our national recovery and resilience plan, we see it as an opportunity for a strategic push towards with the sustainable development of tourism sector, because as you mentioned, and we have a large part of the GDP from the tourist sector. And the tourist sector, this is the reason why it really must go in a different direction, not to mass tourism development, but regarding to the diversifying tourism sector, more to the health tourism sector, more to sports tourism sector, like Mr. Talas did pronounce it correctly, mentioned it in the beginning.
You're perfect.
This is the Yes, this is the directions why we plan to go with the tourist sector, because if we left it in this way, this couldn't be sustainable anymore. So this is the reasons why we mentioned when I mentioned in the beginning what are the measures and what are our recovery and resilience plans and directions regarding the continuation and the moving forward with more sustainable tourism, and not moving from the massive tourism and going to more strategic and repositioning of the Croatian tourism in diversification of the tourism sector.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and let me come in on the question related. First of all, if I may, just to contribute a little bit with what the ministers say, it is very easy to say that it's important to diversify and to invest in other sectors. But the reality is that before COVID, if you look at the last 5 years and all the jobs created in all the sectors around the world, the technology, the financial, agriculture, and tourism, 1 in 4 new jobs, 1 in 4 jobs created in the planet were in travel and tourism. So it's also something very important to consider, that the sector fosters job creation, allows people to work in their own city so that you don't have to migrate to other hubs to work. That's something also that you have to factor in. And Croatia has an amazing amount of assets and potential to still develop even more their tourism sector. Now, that being said, we are forecasting a strong summer based on the data that we have seen from our members. The bookings are showing that, and we believe that we can start our recovery in June, May timeframe. A lot of countries are going to open in May. Yes, in some countries, the vaccination rollout is very aggressive, and that's promising, but it's not enough. we need to implement a protocol that includes testing, contact tracing, and the use of wearing the mask and all the protocols that we mentioned. I have been traveling in the last 12 months. I have traveled a lot. Every single time with wearing the mask and the protocols, it is possible. We need to work together to identify the people that are infected, isolate those infected, and being able to resume travel. But testing is a very important component. This vaccine is going to help us, but it's not the only solution. So we need to implement all the solutions that we have in our toolbox in order to resume travel. And we see the bookings, as I say, in the second half of the year very strong. Our members are telling us that the bookings right now, they look better than 2019. That gives you an idea about the possibility for a strong comeback.
Joan, if I have a minute, I would like to be fair. I would like to be fair with Reli and Maida, and I would just have. I will give you a minute because I wanted to hear from you, and probably it's the same question, and I would like to insist on that. How digital technology, digital transformation, Maida, you could tell me how it can contribute digital technology in the digital transformation in the tourism sector now that we have recovered. And at the same time, really, how do you plan to use all this digital transformation of tourism to help the industry go on with the recovery? Just be short because we are running out of time. I appreciate that you will do it. Thank you.
So in my opinion, digital... sorry, who is the first?
Hello,
Go ahead.
Maida, you could do it. You know ladies first,
Okay.
So, really?
Thank you. So in my opinion, digital transition in tourism sector is actually of utmost importance because without it, the transition towards smart, sustainable and green tourism will really be challenging. Digital transition will enable value-added products through innovative digital and green solutions, actually. And all stakeholders will be affected by it, not just in public or just in private sector. In public sector, this transition will help administration to become open, efficient, and inclusive, and that will actually reestablish trust between businesses and government. While in private sector, digital transition will increase business efficiency and management and customer experience as well. And it will lead toward development of new and innovative products and services, and it will support actually sustainability of touristic systems. And while we were talking about this diversification away from tourism, I didn't understand that it is to be abandoned, but actually this transformation and transition should be ensured in tourism, but this diversification should be in addition, not away from tourism. Thank you.
Okay, now really, you see, you are the last.
Mr. Charles.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry. Mr. Charles,
Yes,
if I
please,
may
please, Madam
just
Minister.
add, yes, I completely agree with Maida, and this is the direction what we plan to go when we were talking about the diversification. She completely now, I think, elaborated what is the point between diversification, what we meant by saying diversification, in which fields you want to more contribute, much more going regarding the development, further development of tourist sector.
Which really you're not the last but not least again. But tell me,
I'd like first, if allowed,
go digital.
If allowed, I'd first want to go to something that Gloria said and just add that as important as the rules are, it's also important that are not changed. It cannot be that we see again something like happened with our Dutch guests in Croatia last year, that in the middle of the season, suddenly the rule has changed and people need to live from today to today. So we first of all need to make sure that the rules are there and they're maintained. Regarding the digital, I think the main change that we see is not only in the implementation of the digital, is by it's the education of a whole generation that finds it today much easier to use And we alone saw 7,000 downloads of application of mobile keys in our properties this summer, which is actually telling us that as easy it is to implement, it's the people who need to use it who have gone through a very significant forced education now to digital their lives. And I think it's going to work fantastic. It's going to help the security and the better feel of safety of people coming, and they will find it much easier to use than generations in the past.
Okay. Before I give the last word to John, because we have actually go beyond the time, I would like to thank you all. It was a great pleasure, a great honor, a great pleasure. I hope that for the people I don't know yet, I will come and visit you and get to know each other in your country, in Croatia. Gloria, I hope that I can travel to London sometime because I haven't met you there. I hope soon. And Minister, it will be an honor if I meet you in the future, as I did with the previous minister in your place and with your government in the past. And I would like to thank you all because it was I will send you my CV because I come from the Ernst & Young. You might be very useful, of course. I'm
Definitely, thank you.
I do some Ernst & Young in Greece, and really, you really promised me a couple of days ago that she will host me in one of his hotels when we are able to travel. So I will combine. I will combine the pleasure as a tourist.
You're more than welcome.
With work I can do and to meet you all there. It will be, and of course my friends in HESA group, Marina and Andrea. Joan, it's a pleasure that you include me in your day today. You included me, and I'm very happy. We haven't met in person already, but I hope that we will do that. And feel free to ask me, call me, just say hello, see how things are going. Please, you need to have the final word. And thank you so much. Stay tuned. We can all meet with doing our vaccination, wearing our mask, and we'll travel safely. And I hope even if it's not for this year, next year we'll do it with all of these and we'll meet in real live events. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. George. I think we are happy to see you in Croatia, so you can see on the spot the diversification and specialization of the Croatian tourism. Thank you.
Oh, yes. I know it already because I was in Porridge like 1.5 years ago. I would like to visit again. I will be there soon, as soon as I can. Thank you, Madam Minister.
Well, thank you very much indeed, George. That was a splendid session. Thank you for moderating, and thanks to all our great panelists on this final session of the day, which lived up to our expectations. We look forward to following the Croatia story and seeing all of you in person at some point soon, as George said, I hope. I just want to finish by thanking all our speakers from today, and then particularly to thank all our sponsors, A1, Arena Hospitality Group, Erste Bank, EY Croatia, the Croatian Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Zagrebačka Bank, and Poslovni Dnevnik also, and all the rest of the sponsors and partners who made this event possible. It wouldn't have happened except for you. So The Economist extends our great thanks and appreciation for that. I hope everybody enjoyed the day. Thanks once again, and see you all very soon. Goodbye.
this moment changed customer expectations forever? How can you transform at speed to build value that lasts? Are you reframing your future? Or is the future reframing you? In this time of change, find out how we can help you uncover opportunities now, next, and beyond.
Ne čekajte s uređenjem dječje sobe. Ugovorite gotovinski kredit u ZABI s fiksnom kamatnom stopom u samo par klikova putem M-kredita ili kod više od 1000 bankara koji su vam na raspolaganju na preko 100 lokacija.
ZABA, banka za sve što vam je važno.
Sada ugovorite gotovinski kredit još brže uz opciju M-kredit putem M-ZABA aplikacije. U par jednostavnih koraka bez dolaska u banku.
Everything and nothing has changed. Even if the world feels uncertain, it's reassuring to know things that were important before still matter today. Connecting people, sharing ideas, and solving problems. These things will always be in our DNA. Working across borders, helping to keep doors open, business flowing, and continuing to realize the hopes and ambitions of our customers and colleagues. When you think about it like that, thankfully, not quite everything has changed.
Come on.